Hey y'all, let's talk about a new feature in Mast to easily use attributes to animate elements. So you can see now, if I go ahead and preview or go out to the staging URL for the inspired layouts page, you can see that text and elements are animating in sort of a stagger effect, one at a time, depending on how they're applied. And just gives that soft animated feel that I see most often across different marketing sites, that ultimately we don't necessarily need a ton of wild stuff unless you're going for awards or something like that, but just a soft feel that is customizable globally. So we at least have a guiding path on how to do that now in Mast. So the way this works is we have a single interaction here. And in this case, the one that we come with out of the box is called stagger children. And so as the name implies, this is targeting an attribute on a parent, and then it will get any immediate children and stagger animate them in one at a time based on the settings that are in here. And then we can use that attribute to apply to different things like a section, a column, a row, and then there's also the newer content wrap component, right? And so in any of these, you can see over here on the right, there is an animate prop now that it says you can add stagger-children to these and they will animate in. So if we look down at this one, you can see stagger-children is applied. Again, I can preview them directly here instead of on just the staging link. And then if I go in and look at the actual setup here, you can see there's that data-animate attribute as the root we will always use, and then the prop is bound to that. So what's beautiful about the attribute base is you can set it up like this. We intentionally only add it to those few components I mentioned because, we don't necessarily want it everywhere, but you could extend this as with most things in Mast. But the other point is you can also use it statically very easily. So for example, if I wrapped this in a div, and this also had a paragraph, for example, if this was all within a closed, hero or CTA component or something like that, I could just add the same thing here, data-animate and stagger children, right? And then go ahead and preview, and you can see those animate in. Another little detail is that this will work both if the element is above the fold on page load or as it scrolls into view. It is only set up as a scroll trigger. Technically in Webflow. And I mean, shout out Timothy Ricks. This was in a side channel. I asked about this and there was a really key setting here to uncheck this clamp start and end values that allows you to be able to use the scroll trigger, as it says up here, on anywhere, right? And so that it will trigger properly on page load without you having to physically scroll. And so let's look at how this interaction is set up, because again, as I said, we want this to just be the starting point, and you can customize and add other options as you need for your specific project going forward. Mast is very much a, teach somebody how to fish and they'll eat for a lifetime, not give you a fish and you'll eat for a day. We want you to learn how this stuff works so that you can extend it confidently. So all this is it's using, first off, interactions with GSAP or IX3 in Webflow. We want to always use the latest and greatest there. It is performant and super powerful, especially if you do want to do more complex things later. And we can do things like we're doing here. We can target attributes and other things you just can't do with the older IX2. And so this is set up as a scroll trigger, and then on the trigger, we are just targeting that data-animate, and then stagger children attribute. And then again, unchecking this. And then if you wanted to adjust any of these settings for your case, you absolutely could, like start and end points. And then in this case, we're just triggering play on enter. But again, if you wanted this to like reset on leave, and then play again on enter back, you could totally do that very quickly and easily. And again, it updates globally, which is really nice. And then, actions here, we are doing a stagger children. And so in this case, we're getting any of the direct children of the trigger. And then we have some settings here. Again, these are all just kind of the baseline, very simple, basic, but you could adjust these as you want to extend the duration or the amount of offset time or even added ease to the offset, and so on. We also have this saved as a preset, so it is here if you wanted to apply it different ways. For example, something else we've seen people doing as they've just been experimenting with, and then even in our own internal contributors group, Matthew Munger, amazing shout out, that like you could also divide this up where you have a separate attribute for a trigger from the target element. So for example, if you wanted the trigger to be a wrapping section and then the target to be a wrapper of the individual children within, you could split them up that way. And the last thing here is we just want to make sure that this can run on all pages. And of course, we're always thinking about accessibility in Mast. And so Webflow thankfully gives us this prefers reduced motion, setting out of the box. So we just don't want any of this to animate at all if the user has reduced motion turned on. And then the last detail I wanted to call out was, Webflow did ship an update to fix never know how to say it. FOUS, F-O-U-S. It's essentially to make sure that there is no flicker, of these things on load. And while it does seem to work properly in preview, I've seen some inconsistency, on the live page. And so, we do have just the manual fallback in here. So if you go into the custom code and global CSS, you'll see at the bottom of this is the load animation, FOUS. And then, we're just saying if it's not in design mode, because again, design mode seems to work fine. Then on the live page, we're going to get that attribute, and any immediate children. And then we're going to set, in this case, opacity 0. So I'm showing this because if you wanted to adjust your stagger to be something like move and opacity, then you want to update this as well to whatever that initial state of the transform is, for example, or maybe it's rotate, or I don't know. Just know that this is here if you want to modify it. And again, maybe we will be able to remove that in the near future if this was maybe regression that will be fixed. And maybe that's the last point. Is the other thing here is, as with Mast, always we want to lean into native functionality, right? So that this is really accessible, clear what's being set up. Anybody, including yourself or future devs, or even maybe non-technical people with design access, could come in and modify things to adjust whatever, right? Maybe they want this to be way more dramatic, so it's really soft and subtle like that, or snappier or something. And so it's all doable here, which is really nice. And then, the last thing I'd say is also, I've seen, including in, webflow.com that's built on Mast. If you look at our Mast landing page, there's a video overview there. We're actually using a similar approach, to this, but we're differentiating between CSS for anything that's above the hero and then GSAP, or interactions, with GSAP for anything that's on scroll. And I do think that is the hyper performant way. So you could take this exact same approach. In many ways, you could potentially even just use a slightly different attribute, and then have CSS written that maybe gets every nth child up to, I don't know, something large, 20 or some items that you probably wouldn't have 20 elements that need to stagger, or more than 20 elements that need to stagger on load. So you could do something like that if you want to go to that extent. But I think what's really powerful here is GSAP is still very performant, and this is entirely native, and really simplifies it down for, I think, the vast majority of sites that don't need those extra few milliseconds of performance. And so yeah, that's the last note there. Hopefully this is useful. Excited to see how you use it, extend it. Again, remember that this is just the starting point. If you really want to get more granular, you could just follow the same methodology, use the same data-animate attribute as the root name is our recommendation, and then set up different values for any kind of thing, whether it's split text, or you could have individual ones for like a different delay for each individual element, which is kind of what we do on webflow.com. I think this is really extensible. So we're excited. Thank you so much. Have a great day.